June environment. The first topic is ban on endosulfans. The Supreme Court has slammed the government of Kerala for failure to provide relief to the victims of exposure to endosulfan pesticide. In 2017, the Supreme Court had ordered the state to pay 5 lakh rupees to each victim. About the endosulfan, endosulfan is a widely banned pesticide with hazardous effect on human genetics and endocrine system. It is sprayed on crops like cotton, cashew, fruit, tea, paddy, tobacco, etc. for control of pests such as whiteflies, aphids, beetles, worms, etc. Now, the effect of endosulfan on environment is that it gets accumulated in the food chain, leading to higher concentration. And if endosulfan is released into water, it is expected to be absorbed in sediments and may bioconcentrate in aquatic organisms. In humans and animals, ingestion of endosulfans results in disease ranging from physical deformities, cancer, birth disorders, and damage to brain and nervous systems. Now, the ban on endosulfan was brought about by Supreme Court in 2011. It is also listed under Rotterdam Convention on Prior Informed Consent and is also banned by the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Let's move on to Lancet Planetary Health Report. The Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health has published the Lancet Planetary Health Report. The key highlights of the report from the global perspective is that pollution was responsible for 9 million premature deaths in 2015, making it the world's largest environmental risk factor for disease and premature death. Now, ambient air pollution accounted for nearly 75% of all death, with fatalities in China the highest at 1.8 million. Certain reductions in death from household air pollution have been noted, and these reductions are offset by the increase in deaths attributed to ambient air pollution and toxic chemical pollution. More than 90% of the pollution related deaths occur in low income and medium income countries. The findings related to India are that pollution led to over 2.3 million premature deaths in India in 2019, accounting for over a fourth of the 9 million such fatalities worldwide. Now, economic losses from modern forms of pollution, including ambient and toxic chemicals, now amount to at least 1% of country's GDP. India continues to account for the world's largest estimated pollution-related debt in 2019, ahead of China. Ambient air pollution alone may have led to nearly 1.7 million deaths in India in 2019, but fatalities attributed to traditional sources of pollution, indoor air and water pollution, have dropped to less than half of the number compared to 2000. Now let's move on to circular economy in municipal solid and liquid wastes. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has released a report titled Circular Economy in Municipal Solid and Liquid Waste. The circular economy is a model of production and consumption that involves sharing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials products as long as possible. Now, the purpose of the report is to provide a comprehensive implementable, and forward-looking action plan for the management of municipal solid and liquid waste. It also aims to promote India's transition from a linear take and make waste mindset to a multi-life cycle circular approach. Now, the key findings of the report is that in India, approximately 1.5 lakh tons of solid waste is daily generated, and 35% of this is dry waste, and the major share of dry waste is plastic. Out of the 26,000 tons of plastic waste generated daily, only 15,600 tons are recycled, and the rest goes to landfills and water bodies. The treatment of municipal solid waste and construction waste can generate nearly 30,000 crore revenue per annum, which can create employment opportunities. Now, the recommendations given by the report are: government should reduce GST and other taxes on products that are made of recycled material from 5% to 5% from the present 18%. Now, state pollution control boards and urban development and industry departments can introduce a tax for dumping of all municipal waste in landfills. Mandatory use of 25% recycled materials in non-food grade packaging to ensure recycling. Cement kilns must use 25% RDF, that is non-recyclable combustible dry waste, to replace coal. Let's move on to People's Biodiversity Register. Calcutta has become the first major metropolitan city in India to prepare such a register. Chandigarh and Indore also have such registers. Now, about People Biodiversity Register. The People's Biodiversity Register entails complete documentation of biodiversity such as flora, fauna, medicinal sources, land use and human activities, etc. within a particular place. The Biological Diversity Act has made it mandatory for every local self-governing institution in rural and urban areas to constitute a biodiversity management committee within their area of jurisdiction. Once constituted, the BMC must prepare a People's Biodiversity Register in consultation with the local people. A PRB comprehensively documents traditional knowledge of local biological resources. The BMC is custodian of these resources, and any industry that extracts biological resources from these areas has to share certain parts of its revenue with the local community. Now, what are the advantages of PBR? The PBR aids in tracing the changes in habitat, help in conservation and sustainable development of biodiversity. Since it is a bottoms-up approach, PBR will help in understanding the overlap of culture and natural biodiversities. Kolkata's PBR document 399 plants and 283 animal species. Now let's move to community forest rights. The government of Chhattisgarh has recognized the community forest rights of tribals living in Gudiapar, a hamlet inside Khanger Ghati National Park in Bastar. Chhattisgarh has also become the second state to recognize community forest rights of a village inside a national park. Now about the community forest resources. The community forest resource area is a common forest land that has been traditionally protected and conserved for sustainable use by a particular community. The community uses it to assess resources available within the traditional and customary boundaries of the village for seasonal use of landscape in case of pastoralist community. Now about the community forest resource rights. These rights are recognized under Section 3(1) Subclause 1 of the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers, that is Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006. They provide for recognition of right to protect, regenerate, or conserve or manage the community forest resources. These rights allow the community to formulate rules for forest use by itself and others, and thereby discharge its responsibilities under the Section 5 of the FRA. Significance of CFR rights. Now, CFR rights, along with community rights, which include Nistar rights and rights over non-timber forest products, ensure sustainable livelihood of the community. These rights give authority to Gram Sabha to adopt local traditional practices of forest conservation and management within the community forest resource boundary. These rights also underline the integral role that forest dwellers play in the sustainability of forests and in the conservation of biodiversity. Let's move on to eco-sensitive zones around protected forests, which is ordered by Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has directed that every protected area, that is national park, wildlife sanctuary across India, should have a mandatory eco-sensitive zone of a minimum 1 kilometer. Now about eco-sensitive zone. Eco-sensitive zones are area notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change around protected areas such as national park and wildlife sanctuaries. The objective of declaring an area as ESZ is to create a shock absorber, that is to protect to the protected areas by regulating and managing the activities around such areas. ESZs also act as a buffer zone between areas of high protection to areas accorded relatively milder protections. Though Environment Protection Act 1986 does not mention the word eco-sensitive zone, the government uses Section 3, Subclause 2 of the Environment Protection Act 1986 and Rules 5(1) of the Environment Protection Rules 1986 to declare ESZs and EFAs. Guidelines issued by the Supreme Court. Every protected forest, national park, wildlife sanctuary across the country should have a mandatory eco-sensitive zone of a minimum 1 kilometer from their demarcated boundaries. In case of any national park or protected areas already having a buffer zone extending beyond 1 kilometer, that would prevail. Mining within the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and the ESZ shall not be permitted. No permanent structure will be allowed within the ESZ. Now, the principal chief conservator for each state and the union territory has been directed to make a list of subsisting structures within the ESZs and submit reports to Supreme Court within 3 months. Now let's move on to contribution of non-CO2 pollutants to global warming. According to a new study, the share of non-CO2 pollutants in contribution to global warming is almost as much as CO2, that is carbon dioxide. The potential of non-CO2 pollutants on climate change. IPCC working group reports have shown that the contributions of CO2 and non-CO2 greenhouse gases to global heating was 52 to 57% and 63 to 68% respectively. Some aerosols released from fossil fuel sources are known to warm the planet, while others have the opposite effect. Cooling aerosols include sulfates, nitrates, and organic compounds primarily. Though decarbonization efforts will lower the level of CO2, the warming cause will not go down in the next 25 years. Hence, global temperature will likely exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial levels by 2035 and 2 degree by 2050 if the focus is merely upon decarbonization efforts and non-CO2 pollutants are ignored. Status of non-CO2 pollutants in global policy decision. Government focuses only on carbon dioxide. The ill impacts of non-carbon dioxide counterparts are well known, but the government's climate mitigation efforts target only CO2 emissions. Neglection from international agencies. The third working group report of the International Panel for Climate Change, which deals with mitigating climate change, focuses on carbon dioxide and few other greenhouse gases, but excludes other non-carbon dioxide pollutants. Hence, there is a need to urgently bend the emission curve of methane, HFC, black carbon, and a few other precursor gases that increases lower atmospheric ozone. Now, the government has to simultaneously devise strategies to target CO2 and non-CO2 pollutants like methane, black carbon, HFCs, tropospheric ozone, and nitrous oxide. Combining decarbonization measures with target can provide net cooling by 2030, bringing down the rate of warming from 2030 to 2050 by roughly 50% and avoid 2 degrees Celsius level. Oil and gas consuming countries, coal consuming and rice producing countries shall also reduce methane levels. Now let's look at the draft notification for electronic waste management. The Ministry of Environment has released the draft notification for electronic waste management for public feedback. Now let's look at the generation of e-waste in India. According to the Global E-Waste Monitor 2017, India generates about 2 million tons of e-waste annually and ranks 5th among the e-waste producing countries after USA, China, Japan, and Germany. Most of India's e-waste is recycled by the informal sector under hazardous conditions, and the thrust of e-waste rule is to have more of this waste handled by the formal sector. Now let's move on to the State of Environment Report of 2022. The State of Environment Report of 2022 has been released by Center for Science and Environment. The key findings of the report are heavy pollution in rivers. 3 out of every 4 rivers monitoring station in India posted alarming levels of heavy toxic metals such as lead, iron, nickel, cadmium, arsenic, chromium, and copper. Poor waste management treatment. According to CPCB, 72% of the sewage waste is dumped without treatment. Now, coastal erosion is also one of the findings of the report. Increase in the frequency of cyclones, sea level rise, anthropogenic activities such as construction of harbour, beaches, and building of dams. Total forest cover area. India's total forest cover area has registered a little over 0.5% increase between 2017 and 2021. But most of the increase has taken place in open forest category, which includes commercial plantations. This has happened at the cost of moderately dense forest, which is normally the area closest to human habitation. At the same time, very dense forest, which absorbs maximum carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, occupy just 3% of the total forest cover. Now let's move on to the Environmental Performance Index 2022. The Environmental Performance Index 2022 has been released. It has ranked India at the bottom of 180 countries. The index has become controversial due to its methodology. The government has also disputed the findings of the index. Now about the Environmental Performance Index, EPI is an international ranking system of countries based on their environmental health. It is a biennial index first started in 2002 as the Environment Sustainability Index by World Economic Forum. It is prepared by the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy in collaboration with Columbia University Center for International Earth Sciences Information Network. It uses 40 performance indicators to assess and rank 180 countries. The indicators measure how close countries are in meeting internationally established sustainability targets for specific environmental issues. The 40 indicators are under the broad categories of climate change performance, environmental health, and ecosystem viability. The 2022 EPI has included new parameters to its earlier assessment, that is projection of progress towards net zero emissions in 2050, new air quality indicators, that is environmental health, and sustainable pesticide use, that is ecosystem viability. Now, the key findings of the Environmental Performance Index of 2022 is that India has been ranked 180 out of 180 countries with a score of 18.9. Now, India's previous rank was 168 with a score of 27.6 in 2020. Denmark tops the list with a score of 77.9. India ranks close to the bottom on all three categories, that is climate change, environment health, ecosystem viabilities. On several other indicators, India's performance is dismal, like biodiversity habitat index, species protection index, air quality, heavy metal and such as lead in water, waste management. It suggests that India, China, US, Russia will account for over 50% of the residual greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. Objections raised by India regarding the Environmental Performance Index of 2022 is that as per the Environment Ministry, some of the indicators used for assessing performance are extrapolated based on unscientific methods. There has been shifting of weightage on many indicators has resulted in India's low ranking. For black carbon growth, India's score actually improved from 32 in 2022. However, the weightage of this indicator has been reduced to 0.0038. Climate change has been given a very high weightage and tends to neglect the development need of poorer countries. Similarly, the low weightage given to per capita greenhouse gas emissions automatically reduces the rank of countries like India and China. Now, the faulty methodology here is projections for greenhouse gas emissions have been computed based on average rate of change in emissions for the last 10 years. It is not based on modeling that takes into account longer periods, extended renewable energy capacity use, and additional carbon sinks, etc. The index emphasizes the extent of protected area rather than the quality of protection. Indicators such as agrobiodiversity, soil health, food loss, and waste are not included even though they are important for developing countries with large agrarian populations. Now, Dr. Navroz Dubash, one of the authors of the latest report of IPCC, has criticized the index that the index EPI 2022 is neither ethically correct nor reflects the political reality. Despite the inconsistencies in the Environmental Performance Index, the government should not ignore the fact that India was ranked 168th in 2020 and has never been in the top 150 countries since the index was started. This shows that there are several environmental issues in India, especially air pollution, that needs to be addressed urgently for attaining sustainable development. Now let's look at the microplastics found in Antarctica. Scientists have found presence of microplastics in snow fresh in Antarctica. This is for the first time microplastics have been found in Antarctica. The most commonly found plastic was PET, and this was found in 79% of the samples. About microplastics. So microplastics are basically tiny plastic debris that is smaller than 5 mm in length and tinier than a grain of rice. There are two types of microplastics. The first one is primary microplastics. They are used These are the tiny particles that are purposely designed for commercial use, like in cosmetics, industrial manufacturing, fibers from synthetic textile like nylon. Now, secondary microplastics are those microplastics that are formed through degradation of larger plastics items including bottles, fishing nets, plastic bags. This occurs through exposure to environment like radiation from sun, wind, and ocean waves. Presence of microplastic. Now, microplastics have traveled thousands of kilometers through air. However, it is likely that the presence of humans in Antarctica have established the microplastic footprint. Now, what are the impacts of these findings? Now, harmful species can enter Antarctica. Microplastics can have harmful substances stuck onto them surfaces, such as heavy metals and algae, so that they can provide a way in which harmful species can make it into some remote and sensitive areas. Impact on local species. Ingestion of microplastics by various life forms in the region, from microorganisms like zooplankton to larger predators like king penguin, can disrupt their usual biological processes and negatively impact the entire Antarctic food chain. Increase impact of global warming. Now, scientists say that dark colored microplastics can absorb sunlight and enhance local heating. Scavenging. Now, when snow travels in atmosphere, it binds itself to airborne particles. This phenomena is known as scavenging. Increase in landslide and avalanches. Fast melting glaciers on mountain ranges in different parts of the world are increasingly becoming hazards, leading to landslides and avalanches and causing glacial lakes to burst their banks.